and kittens, welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. And we have a full crew today. Welcome back, Dr. Kip. Congratulations on your unpaid Nobel.
Thanks, Aaron. It was a surprise when the officials contacted me to let me know of this prestigious award.
Okay. All right.
Oh, they're just handing them out there like candy, nowadays, I guess.
And I haven't even been on the Danny Jones podcast.
For shame.
I know.
So what do you want? Stop. I'm doing a show. Stop. Okay. All right. So we're doing, what is it? 1 Samuel 6th.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
you just want to give me an aneurysm, don't you?
All right. You have any opening announcements, Lawrence?
Opening announcements? No. But we're gonna keep talking about the Ark, and it's a very
that was
very
Genesis
important...
6. We're not talking about the Ark anymore.
The different Ark,
We
actually
are.
a more interesting Ark. So
Yeah.
I am.
This is the
excited to
golden
continue
ark, not the magical ark, or well, the other magical ark.
Yeah, the one that
Oh, I've
was
eaten
more of a
there.
box. Yeah. No, so yeah, let's continue talking about this.
Yeah, it's the radioactive ark, not the deluge.
Pop up my coffee.
All right. So who's reading today?
I can read.
All right.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah. Finish the chapter.
All right. I'm going to be reading from the Net Bible.
Ooh.
Yeah. DTS folk. All right. When the ark of the Lord had been in the land of the Philistines for 7 months, the Philistines called the priests and the omen readers, saying, "What should we do with the ark of the Lord? Advise us as to how we should send it back to its place." They replied, "If you're going to send the ark of the God of Israel back, don't send it away empty. Be sure to return it with a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and you will understand why his hand is not removed from you." They inquired, "What is the guilt offering and that we should send to him?" They replied, "The Philistine leaders number 5. So send 5 gold swords and 5 gold mice, for it is the same plague that has afflicted both you and your leaders. You should make images of the swords and images of the mice that are destroying the land. You should honor the God of Israel. Perhaps he will release his grip on you, your gods, and your land. Why harden your hearts like the Egyptian and Pharaoh did? When God treated them harshly, didn't the Egyptians send the Israelites on their way? So now go and make a new cart. Get 2 cows that have calves and that have never had a yoke placed on them. Harness the cows to the cart and take their calves from them back to their stalls. Then take the ark of the Lord and place it on the cart and put it in a chest beside the gold objects you're sending to him as a guilt offering. You should then send it on its way, but keep an eye on it. If it should go up the way of its town border to Beth Shemesh, then he has brought this great calamity on us. But if that's not the case, then we will know that it was not his hand that struck us. Rather, it just happened to us by accident." So the men did as instructed. They took the 2 cows that had calves and harnessed them to a cart. They also removed their calves to their stalls. They put the ark of the Lord on the cart, along with the chest, the gold mice, and the images of the swords. Then the cows went directly on the road to Beth Shemesh. They went along, mooing as they went. They turned neither to the right nor to the left. The leaders of the Philistines were walking along behind them all the way to the border of Beth Shemesh. Now the residents of Beth Shemesh were harvesting wheat in the valley. When they looked up and saw the ark, they were pleased at that sight. The cart was coming to the field of Joshua, who was from Beth Shemesh. It paused there near a big stone. Then they cut up the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. The Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the chest that was with it, which contained the gold objects. They placed them on near the big stone. At that time, the people of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and made sacrifices to the Lord. The 5 leaders of the Philistines watched what was happening and then returned to Ekron on the same day. These are the gold swords that the Philistines brought as a guilt offering to the Lord, one for each of the following cities: Ashdod, Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. The gold mice corresponded in number to all the Philistine cities of the 5 leaders, from the fortified cities to hamlet villages to greater Abel, where they positioned the ark of the Lord until this very day in the field of Joshua, who was from Beth Shemesh. But the Lord struck down some of the people of Beth Shemesh because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. He struck down 50,070 of the men. The people grieved because the Lord had struck the people with a hard blow. The residents of Beth Shemesh asked, "Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? To whom will the ark go up from here?" So they sent messengers to the residents of Kiriath Jearim, saying, "The Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down here and take it back home with you." Then the people of Kiriath Jearim came and took the ark of the Lord. They brought it.
Wait. I
Oh,
think.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
that's it.
that was
Yeah.
Okay, so I got a problem with this. You look
No.
inside the Ark of the Covenant, you die.
Mhm.
I'm not sure about that translation.
50,000 people.
Yeah. I mean, it's a
Looked
bit
into the ark.
ambiguous. It is
Yeah.
a bit ambiguous.
They all
The
had to
reading.
stand in line, right? It's a process that must have taken hours for everybody to get it. And so everybody's standing in line watching as they saw the 3 Nazis melt, right? And then they went ahead and did the thing anyway. So there's like 50,000 of them. Oh, I'll take a look. And then somebody screams and then melts or whatever. And then the next people in line for 50,000 people.
I would say it's ambiguous because the
Yeah.
prefix that's used, which could be translated as in, so they looked in, it doesn't really mean in. It's also used with the verb to see in general. So like to look in
Looked at.
doesn't necessarily
Looks
mean
like
look
a-
inside.
Yeah, it
could
can
just
be
be
read
look
as
at.
Remove the covering and behold the
No,
actual ark.
just look at.
No.
Looking at the
Mm.
ark. In the Hebrew, you would write it as look in.
Some verbs.
The word that we translate as in is sometimes translated as at. Let's say it's not.
Yeah,
Sure.
some
one-to-one.
verbs in Hebrew will take this this preposition, which most commonly means in,
Yeah. that's
for
correct, yeah.
just like an object marker.
It's a pretty
And-
strong condemnation of curiosity. How
Well,
dare you don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain.
Well, the thing is, especially with the arc, I talked about this before, and I don't actually know if how popular this is among scholars. I think it's when I first was introduced to this, it was a minority view, so I don't know where it's at right now. I don't know if Kip, you hold this position, but I think like the actual historical arc would have been the statue, and the kind of like what's been left over in the imagery is like just maybe like the footstool portion, right? Because if you see where is it in verse 15, yeah, the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the box beside it, in which were the gold objects, and that could mean like a few things, right? But the thing is, everything that we've seen of the ark so far, how powerful it is, the imagery that's associated with it, the fact that the Philistines took it into to the house of Dagon, right, where their statue of Dagon was. To me, it fits a lot more into the category of this was a statue of Yahweh. So the so like looking at the ark, and actually if you think about it this way, right, in we get the narrative with Moses, right, where he's in the Holy of Holies, and like he is there in the presence of God, right, where he he sees God essentially, and his depending on the version that you're reading, either he grows horns or his face is glowing, right?
Mhm.
Those are the two options. So looking at the ark or touching the ark, whatever this is, it's supposed to be dangerous, and this isn't too out of line for how images of God were understood in the ancient Near East. Now, this is, of
Mhm.
course, from what I can see, quite a ramped up version, and I don't know if that's because we just have the text preserved better, or if it's just because it was more of a ramped up theology for it. But either way, I think it's a very interesting. I don't know. I don't know how the word I
It,
want to
I,
put
I
on it. It's
wanted
a
to
very
point.
interesting
I
motif.
I wanted to point out that it was often quite common to cover the prime image of the gods, to cover their face or something else, except for very special situations. And we have throughout the law this list of you are never to look directly at the ark, except it is always to be covered by a linen cloth and carried
Yeah.
by only these select Levites. And only this family of Levites, when you set up the tabernacle, can go into the special room and set down the ark and take off the linen cloth and leave. And I won't kill them because they're doing it according to protocol. Now, it seems that at least with regard to the Philistines, God is a little more lenient about protocol because they don't know all the ins and outs. They're doing the best they can with the here's a bunch of gold, please stop smiting us. But as you get closer to the actual Israelites, they're expected to follow the correct protocols. And so if the ark is not covered by linen or put in an enclosed area where people can't, gawk at it, then you could absolutely have the smiting. And let's face it, God, it kind of has a habit of smiting everybody associated with everybody or who just happens to accidentally be in the vicinity of whoever pissed him off. So, maybe you just
Yeah.
And I
brain
have
melt.
to comment about the power of the ark. It was so powerful that the people who brought it into battle lost the battle, and it
Yeah.
was stolen from them. That's how powerful it was.
Yeah, it changes a whole lot. We're gonna get into it later. But then there's this dude. What's his name? Uriah? Did he touch? Is that the one who touches the ark?
Uza.
No,
Uzzah.
Uzzah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who's that?
Yeah. So yeah, he just touches the ark and he just topples over dead. So the power of the ark itself is kind of vague as to what it can and can't do, or the abilities that it can and cannot give. But
So if you were to put it into a trebuchet and lob it
Gold
at your
is-
enemies, what would happen?
well,
Not much.
then you
Gold is
got to
very
do.
soft.
Yeah,
Like-
but I am very fascinated by the arc narrative itself, because at this point, I'm sure you've noticed, where's Samuel? He's just disappeared. So there was a point where him and Eli, for example, were communicating, but then there was the first part of the narrative wasn't quite that, just seemed like a separate thing, and then there is
And
some
he was
debate
a
about which
boy
layer came
then.
first, but this arc narrative itself is usually seen as a separate thing.
It is the fulfillment of that prophecy, but obviously didn't necessarily occur.
Yeah, it's weird.
Right next to
the whole oh, it'll go if it goes to Bet Shemesh and then it goes to Bet Shemesh, and why Bet Shemesh? That's not where it came from, right?
It might have
The-
been the nearest
beginning
Jewish
of the-
town, and they just wanted to wash their hands of it.
See, to me, it
That's-
reminds me
yeah,
kind
makes
of
sense.
in Judges, right, when they're going across the Jordan and they're setting up these stones as they go through. So that kind of, I don't know if this was seen as part of a pilgrimage or something, but it reminds me of that part of Judges, especially when they are setting up the stones.
Fair enough. The covenant between the people.
Yeah, that
I don't know.
seems to be an
For me, it
etiology
just
here
gives
as
the
well.
vibe of
Yeah.
great. It's not smiting us. Go over there. Ugh, we gave you back to your people. Just go away. Leave us alone.
So if you
Maybe
really
it was
wanted to
Black Death.
destroy your enemies, all you'd have to do is set up one of those roadside curio shops like we have out in the western deserts of this country. You know, come see the thing. You charge admission, and 50,000 people will pay their dollar or their shekel or whatever to go look in the box and then scream and die, and then you just hustle the body out through the tent and bring in the next rube.
Yeah, come see the 5 golden hemorrhoids.
What does that look like, eh?
I know.
Well,
How
Like,
do you fashion a golden tumor?
well, according to well, I have
please
an
tell me they
interpretation
didn't
by
moss cast
well,
someone's ass.
maybe, but I do have a comment by Tsumura, who I think who argues that the at least the
These are-
mouse are like similar in shape to the tumors, but I'll get to that.
Yeah, well, we talked about that before, and it seems like
Yeah.
one hell of a stretch. Maybe
Like
it
a
was like
muscle.
slang or something. I don't know.
Are they
No,
phallic?
I think it does. No, I think it does argue that I have it in my commentary when we get to it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've,
but
I've
it seems-
seen
it seems-
mice, and I've also seen tumors, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I can
I mean,
tell
it
the
seems
difference
people
between these
thought-
two.
It
People
seems people in the
have-
ancient
Not a
times used to
boomer.
think. Ancient people seem to think that certain things look similar. You know, apparently the word for muscle comes from the word for mouse. So a
It's-
little mouse.
I still think
But
like modeling, I don't know, like molding a rat is going to involve some skill. A tumor, what, you just fucking dump a lump of gold and so it forms into water and then it forms into some sort of twisted lump and like, there, a tumor.
Maybe someone had to drink the molten gold and then shit it out, see what it looks like.
Ooh. Then you get
I'm
a crown
wondering
for a
if this
king.
is sort of like referencing some sort of ancient practice where things were offered to gods, like stuff that resembled the disease or whatever, as an offering that would help
yeah,
them.
yeah, you can see
I can
that.
see that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I think I should. Okay, I think I should start. First on verse 1, 7 months. And by the way, if I sound underwater, please let me know so I could refresh. Okay, so we'll start on verse 1. 7 months. Several commentators write that the 7, quote unquote, here is a typological number, either indicating completeness, quote, just as the first plague in Egypt lasted 7 days, seen in Exodus 7:25, unquote, according to Klein, or that, quote, the suffering of the Philistines had reached the maximum limit, end quote, according to Tsumura. Septuagint has the addition, quote, and their land broke out in mice, end quote. And most commentators retain the MT based on 4Q Samuel A.
I wonder why that never happens here. Other people break out in mice. I never break out in mice.
Clearly, you
Yeah.
have correctly appeased the right god.
Now on verse 3, send a guilt offering to him. Hebrew for guilt offering is asham. Klein writes that asham elsewhere refers to purging or to transferring impurity to a substitutionary offering, a reading which McCarter favors for this verse. From the context here and from the use of the verb return, asham refers to reparation offering, as seen in Leviticus 5 verses 2 to 4, which is 6:5 in the Old Testament, and Numbers 5 verses 7 through 8. On that same verse, and you will know, in Hebrew, venodalachem, although this reading is found in Vulgate and Peshitta, Septuagint and 4Q Samuel A read, and you will make atonement for yourselves, in Hebrew, venechaper lachem. McCarter takes the MT here as corrupt, writing that the reading is difficult to construe with the following expression. While Klein favors this, the Septuagint and 4Q Samuel A, Tsumura writes that the MT to know is acceptable as it stands, in the light of Ezekiel 13:12, where, quote, an interrogative clause constitutes the subject of the passive verb. Will it not be said to you, where in the whitewash you smeared on it, end quote. Auld writes that to know makes good but quite different sense. Targum reads, it will be relieved to you. Now on verse 4, the 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats. McCarter writes that these golden objects function in 2 ways. One, quote, they provide a compensatory sacrifice, carrying away the contamination from Philistia and with it the suffering, end quote. And two, quote, the objects also represent a payment of tribute, quote unquote, kavod, not glory. Thus, they are made of gold and have intrinsic worth, end quote. Klein writes that the gold offerings are meant to get rid of the plagues by sending symbols of them away from the ark. Tsumura writes that making and sending golden mice was sympathetic magic, quote unquote, whose purpose was to get rid of the disease itself, not to get rid of the mice as the cause of the disease. He also writes that a metal lump similar to a heel, quote unquote, shaped tumor would also be considered similar to the shape of a mouse, especially when there's an association between the disease and the mice. And so the golden objects are referred alternatively as tumors or swellings or mice, because the mice represent the tumors. The 5 gold rats are missing from the Septuagint and 4Q Samuel A. Auld writes that either both MT and the Septuagint have suffered different losses from a longer original, as is found in the Lucianic Recension, or that both differently supplemented from a shorter original, with the Lucianic Recension conflating the results of both processes of supplementation. In his opinion, the original reading will be, quote, the number of the lords of Philistines, 5 golden swellings, for it is one plague for them all, the images of your mice, quote unquote, that are destroying, end quote.
I wonder if
it's-
so. No, I was just wondering about this word Ophel, which
Yeah.
is interesting. It's the same, yeah, like it's the same word used to describe the spur on the southern end of the old city in Jerusalem was called the Ophel.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
like
you can read it as mound or hill.
yeah, yeah. But I don't know. I like well, I'll just read some of the cognate definitions of this term from the Hebrew Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament here. They say it's the layer of subcutaneous fat around the testicles, the perineum, wild growth of tissue on the vulva, thickening of flesh in the anus. It says it's not equivalent to the Akkadian uplu, which does not mean boil. Could also mean head louse, or scabs, I guess,
Are
in
you
some
saying God gave
texts.
them an STI?
I don't know. Like part of this, like as I'm looking through some of this stuff, part of it makes me wonder if there's a phallic connection here. But yeah.
Or what's the word?
Scatological.
Scatological.
But that's really
Scatological.
feces,
Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe.
So
Yeah,
it could be that it's specifically referring to some sort of disease that attacks like reproductive system. Could we get it to that point, like something to do with fertility?
I wouldn't say.
Yeah.
Well, if it's
Yeah.
hemorrhoids, then maybe not. But yeah, that could be interesting.
Hmm.
I just want to say it's interesting to point out that I think in the Masoretic and like modern texts, this is the first time that the mice come up. None of
Yeah.
the bits like we
Mm.
talked about. Oh, and then the Septuagint adds and mice
Yeah.
ravaging the fields, and that happened a couple of times. This is actually the first time the mice come up. There's no mention of them before, and that's probably why, you know, like Rashi, for example, or other rabbinic commentaries talk about what's the connection of rice to the hemorrhoids. Oh, the rice would go in and like attack them, and
As
in the
I said
bathroom.
before.
Yeah. I'm saying this is probably the reason why they would felt the need to explain away the mice. But then you said that the Septuagint doesn't mention the mice in this
No.
verse.
Yeah,
It
it doesn't mention the
It's
five
just literally the
gold rats, no.
reverse, right? So the Septuagint goes on and on about there being mice in the fields, and the Masoretic doesn't. And then at this verse, where it talks about the golden mice, The Septuagint doesn't talk about
Yeah.
it. It's kind of weird that they're opposites.
Yeah.
So different.
Well, I just found out this comment from Cassiodorus, who wrote that the Philistines were gnawed alive by mice, and just like them, God afflicts sinners in the afterlife.
Oh.
Nice.
Very good.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. On verse 6, McCarter comments, the argument of this verse may be rehearsed as follows. Why should the Philistines be obstinate and refuse to release the ark? The Egyptians were obstinate when the Hebrews were captive there and refused to release them. Yet as soon as Yahweh had his way with the Egyptians, they let the Israelites go. So what will the Philistines gain from obstinacy but further suffering? The implication is that such obstinacy serves no purpose except Yahweh's in his wish to display his power amidst the enemy. Unmistakable is the allusion to Exodus 10 verses 1 through 2 in the so-called J or Yahwistic materials of the Exodus account. On verse 7, a new cart with 2 cows that have calved and have never been yoked. Kimchi, followed by modern commentators, wrote that they request a new cart that wasn't used for labor because of the ark's holiness. Tsumura compares the ark with the wagon of Dagan, quote-unquote, used in the procession during the Zukru festival of ancient Emar. Kimchi's reasoning also falls on the milch cows, or in Hebrew, parot alot. Klein writes that the unworked milch cows are fit for pulling the ark, for practicing in the symbolic ritual which would carry off abomination, and for being sacrificed by the people of Bet Shemesh.
I thought the whole idea was it was a test, right? So you take 2 milk
Yeah,
dairy
but they
cows
sacrificed it afterwards.
who have
right?
just you take 2 dairy cows that have just had calves, and then you lock away the calves. So naturally, they're not going to pull a wagon away from their calves. They're going to want to go back. So that was part of the test of like, are they actually going to miraculously pull a cart and then go off to somewhere they've never been to? And yeah, the fact that they slaughtered them afterwards was like, the rabbis in the Talmud like, see, you're allowed to slaughter female animals on private altars.
Oh, on private altars.
Yeah, they couldn't extend it to the temple.
No,
I think there
of
are.
course.
Yeah. But I think that's because every time it mentions a sacrifice earlier on, it was always a male, unless it might have been like maybe there was a female goat or something at one point. Yeah.
There were.
So they were trying to like say, how could they have done it? Oh well, it's a private altar, so it's different.
Yeah. I mean, I assume they just took the whole thing as an offering to the Lord. I mean, the Jews who received the ark, the gold and the cattle and presumably the cart. It's all supposed to be as unused and special as possible. But again, it's a case of they don't really know the protocol.
They used the wood of the they split up the wood of the cart and presented the cows as the burnt offering. It doesn't say that they used the wood for the burnt offering, but I'm guessing that's what it implies.
That is a natural inference.
Yeah.
Now on verse 9, Auld comments, the religious experts test for whether Yahweh is in fact intimately associated with the ark is ingenious. If milking cattle, just separated from their calves, dragged the cart without guidance toward Israelite territory, then it was Yahweh who caused the Philistine troubles. The alternative is equally interesting. If it was not Yahweh, then it was chance, quote-unquote. Or perhaps we should call it fate, for in the books of Samuel, it seems always to be malign. And yet, we should reckon with the likelihood that the narrator does not want his hearers to acquiesce in the alternative propounded by the Philistine diviners. The next chapter in this book to talk of chance is Saul in 2026. Chance, quote-unquote, in his first response to a situation we readers know was of David's making. On verse 12, I just included a comment by Ibn Kaspi because I really liked it. May the honored men of Bet Shemesh be as wise as these cows.
Yeah. I did want to mention that the traditional.
Yeah, leave your children and go be burned for God. Very wise. Love it.
Yeah, they tried very hard to think of ways that the people of Bet Shemesh sinned, and that's why they were 50,000 of them were killed, or whatever it was. So it's not like, the literal text just says they looked at it or maybe looked into it, but I think the Talmud like has like a bunch of weird like things that they did, like they danced and sang in front of it, or maybe they went further. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, David did that.
Yeah, something similar.
So like I don't even know. Yeah.
Well, what David was like leading a procession to somewhere. It was more like, here it is in the fields. Let's go and be frivolous or whatever it was. So
God does hate fun.
Yeah.
By the way, before Tomer moves on, I wanted to point out for the audience here that the word in verse 11, the images of their tumors. This is tselem. This is the same word that appears in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26-27 to describe the creation of humankind as the image of God, the tselem of the gods, and it's why we should think that in the mind of the writer of the book of Genesis, at least of the first creation story, this is a physical representation. This doesn't have anything to do with reason or sense or morality
if the word was associated
consciousness.
with if the word was associated with like images of gods and like as in idols.
Yeah, you're saying it's a statue of what God looks like.
Yeah.
Well, God had a body. He had a body early on. And this is actually, you would really enjoy the book I just finished, The Anatomy of God by Francesca Stavropoulou.
God and Anatomy. Yeah.
God and Anatomy. Sorry.
Stavropoulou. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't. I'm tired. But it's really interesting because the early concepts of God were very physical, but people's understanding of the world was also more physical. They were, more connected to their feet without the heavy boots. They didn't so much see the soul and the body as these distinct and separate entities where your ghost is driving around your automaton. It's different. And I think, without learning a little bit about how these ancient civilizations viewed spirituality and gods and themselves. And that book is hilarious. She has like an entire chapter devoted to God's penis.
Yeah, it's a really good read though. Like it's really
brilliant.
Good.
It's
just such a phenomenal
also very
writer.
amusing.
Yeah,
thy rod and thy staff comfort me.
I remember for Valentine's Day many years ago, I forget the verse. I think it was like Exodus 34:14 or something like that. I could be wrong on the verse, but like part of the verse was and thou shalt take this rod in thine hand or something like that. So we had like a big heart around it, and it was a pink shirt, and it was a good Valentine's Day gift. But there is it's a really good read, and I'm currently reading through her book on King Manasseh and child sacrifice.
Oh, I was just reading that last week.
Yeah,
fun.
It's
that
really good.
Sounds fun.
So, and then things got uncomfortable when the Lord said, "Now take this rod in thy butt."
That's why he put a G-spot up there for men.
Well,
okay, I think I'll continue.
It says that he created men in, humankind in his image.
You
so
think
God also has a G-spot.
Yeah.
That's why it's called the G-spot. It's God's spot.
Yeah. Are you done with your
Yeah. So I just wanted to mention. Yeah, I just wanted to say that the word Salem is at least in Judaism is very associated with like idols. Like the word an Orthodox Jew would call a cross a Salem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll continue on verse 15. Several commentators see verse 15 as secondary. McCarter writes that the verse, or part of it, was inserted late in the literary history by a, quote, fastidious scribe who insisted that the ark must have been handled by the Levites, members of the official priestly tribe of Israel, end quote. Josephus's version of the verse in Antiquity 6:15 does not mention the Levites. Moreover, Klein notes that the Levites are rarely mentioned in Samuel and Kings, mostly regarding their connection to the ark, as in 2 Samuel 15:24 and 1 Kings 8:4. He writes, quote, "The glosator may have been moved by concern for the rights of the Levites, according to Rost, by a desire to expunge the idea that the stone was an altar, according to Smith and Hertzberg, by offense that the ark was put on the ground, according to Stobe, or by his knowledge that Bet Shemesh was a Levitical city. See Joshua 21 and 1 Chronicles 6, verses 39 through 66, which is 54 through 81 in the Old Testament, or by several or all of these factors," end quote. Tsumura writes, quote, "It can be reasonably assumed that there was a continued priestly tradition at Bet Shemesh, just as there was at Shiloh in 1 Samuel 1-4 and Nob in 1 Samuel 21-22 during the pre and early monarchic days."
Oh, before, yeah, can I say something about verse 15 here?
Sure.
It's or at least a couple of verses. This word, argaz,
Yeah.
which would translate as like box or I guess
Yeah.
Crate.
saddlebags or something like that, right? So this is the only, as far as I know, this is the only place in the entire Bible where this word occurs.
In this chapter. I mean, there are 3 other occurrences of the word in this chapter.
Yeah, in this chapter.
Outside of it,
exactly. No. Yeah.
Ah.
So I just did a stream on Wednesday that went way too long, all about how confident we are that the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, and then translated into Greek, and not the other way around. I mean, there's literally hundreds of features of the text which demonstrate this, like without any shadow of doubt. But this is sort of one of those interesting ones. There are many words in Hebrew that the Greek translators didn't know and they didn't understand, so they would do various things with them. Often they would just transliterate them into Greek. So the Greek translator of this passage calls it sorry here
Thema.
No, it's tothema ergav or ergab, right? So he's just transliterated the word argaz. But what's really interesting here is instead of transliterating it as ergaz or argaz, he read it as argab, and almost certainly because he mistook the last letter in the word, which is a zayin, for a vav, and in the Second Temple period, you can it's very easy to confuse these letters. You know, they will look almost, they're still very similar, but it's even more so in a lot of you see it in a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that Zayin and Vav do look really similar in a lot of these these manuscripts. So clearly the translator he didn't know the word, and this is not a Greek word, right? Artagav, it's just him copying the Hebrew letters into Greek as he saw them, but then got that last letter wrong. So that's fun. I think that's fun.
Yeah, that's interesting. Who would come up with the idea that that would be like saying the Greeks invented Judaism? Oh my gosh. Anyway.
Well, yeah. So
yeah, because here's the thing. with
the Nobel.
The
Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, Amon Hillman, has forwarded this idea.
Oh my God!
The
no.
evidence is you're right that it's basically just that strong, because I think the first the first occurrence of like the word Judaism is in Greek, I think, in like is it First and Second Maccabees, one of those. But like it's
Probably, yeah.
it's not like that. That doesn't mean that they invented Judaism. Like
no.
it is the same level. Like it's the
That
same.
is insane. And I've said the Greeks basically invented Christianity as like their riff on Judaism, but you can't take out the Jewish roots. It's just, the modern form ended up a lot of that sort of colonized ideas. But yeah, that's so, oh my God.
It's difficult to
my
tell
God.
which
You
is
know
an
what?
original
No,
language
it was
from the
aliens.
translation.
It was aliens. Fuck it. The
As is
spirit
often the
science
case.
guy was right. It was aliens.
Yeah, as is often the case with these crazy, fucked up. Oh, sorry. Conspiracy theories. This one too is really just grounded in like bad 19th century historiography, which is massively anti-Semitic.
Yeah,
boot,
that
right?
sounds
Like it-
right.
The thing
Yeah, there
is,
was
they
a whole
probably the
discussion.
thing is they probably aren't even thinking of it like that though, right?
No,
Like,
they don't. They
So
don't
like
see
No.
it.
they
But-
because in their mind it's kind of like, well, like this is the earliest physical in their minds, it's the earliest physical evidence, right? But they're not really talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls or the or what is it,
They wouldn't have had
Ketef
those.
and
They
Nome,
didn't
right?
have
Like they're not talking about that stuff. If you don't include any of that stuff, then yeah, our earliest copies of like the full Bible would be in Greek, but
Yeah.
that's not how history works.
No, we discussed this. Frickin' a year ago, I had the breakdown of, because I was talking about the documentary hypothesis, because I was like, okay, we need to understand that we're talking about different types of things entirely. When we talk about sources, JEDPH, whatever, that is who we think the source text originally came from. And it's not a person, it's an era and a group with a political goal at a certain time and place. And then the source writings, you've got the Septuagint in Greek is older. That's like around the time of Jesus, a little before, but that's how far back it goes. And then the Masoretic text, we only have copies that are Middle Ages, but they are Hebrew, which was the original. So like, where do you even, it's like crazy hippies took only the worst ideas from the most racist period in early science, just the worst ideas, misunderstood them further, took the version from the guy who was like, oh, you have ghosts in your blood, take cocaine about it, and then also took ayahuasca and turned it into something ridiculous and are like, this is what the evidence says. I'm like, no, oh my God, no.
I think I should continue because I think we're going off topic.
No.
Drive me batty.
Yeah, we got so off topic that they have a new emote. Okay, so on verses 17 through 18, on 17 through 18, Klein comments, thank you, Peter. The lists in verses 17 through 18a explicate the preceding account. Each of the 5 hemorrhoids is identified with one of the 5 Philistine cities. Compare verse 4, where the objects are called tumors in the consonantal text. By naming all 5 cities, the narrator insists on the total victory of Yahweh, though it is doubtful that this legitimates the idea that chapter 5 once explicitly described the havoc brought by the ark also in Gaza and Ashkelon. While verse 4 in the Masoretic text lists only 5 golden mice, the reading is absent from 4Q Samuel A, Septuagint, and was identified as secondary. Verse 18 indicates that the number of mouse images was far greater. All of the communities of Philistia were under the Lord's jurisdiction, and these communities could be broken down into fortified cities. Compare Joshua 19:29 and 35, and rustic villages. Compare Deuteronomy 3:5 and Zechariah 2:8, which is 4 in the Old Testament. Verse 18b interprets the great stone as the pedestal on which the ark was put. Compare verse 15 and per contra verse 14, where the stone is an altar. That stone served as a witness until the author's day that Yahweh had brought about the successful return of his ark from a foreign land. For stones as witnesses, see Genesis 31:52 and Joshua 24:27. On verse 19, which I dedicated like 3 comments on that verse because it's very odd. So first on God struck down some of the inhabitants of Bet Shemesh. The Hebrew Bible reads Vayach be'anshei Bet Shemesh, but the Septuagint reads, and the sons of Jeconiah, in Hebrew Yechoniah, were not pleased with the men of Bet Shemesh. We have no information regarding these sons of Jeconiah. Garsiel notes that some suggested reading Vayach in the Masoretic text as a remnant of the name Jeconiah. McCarter writes that the MT is defective and follows Klosterman's translation of the Septuagint, quote, the sons of Jeconiah did not join in the celebration with the men of Bet Shemesh, end quote. He notes that the people of Bet Shemesh were smitten because of the absence of this group. Josephus in Antiquity 6:16 explains that the Bet Shemeshites were smitten because they were not priests. Thus, McCarter suggested that Bnei Yechoniah, the sons of Jeconiah, is a corruption of Bnei HaKohanim, the sons of the priests, i.e., members of the priesthood. Thus, the people of Bet Shemesh were smitten because they had no priests among them. While Klein supports the Septuagint reading, Tsumura rejects seeing the MT as a textual corruption and notes S.D. Walters's opinion that it is more likely, quote, that the sons of Jeconiah belong to an alternate form of the narrative and are a tendentious presence in the text to be explained in terms of Hellenistic Judaism, end quote.
So I actually want to note another thing here. So in just kind of looking over this to Kip's point earlier, the way that what is in verse 18. So the way that the Septuagint translators had it, it doesn't make much sense in the very beginning there, because it uses the singular for mouse, but then describes them as the golden ones. So to me, that this doesn't make much sense grammatically in Greek and would probably only make sense grammatically in Hebrew. Sorry, I just
languages
noticed
are
that.
weird.
So on Kip's point there.
No, it's a valid point. Languages are so weird when you're translating between them. And
Tommy, did you finish?
No.
It's fun.
Okay, keep going. I'll come back
it
to
is
that.
fun.
On that same verse, because they looked into the ark of the Lord. Hebrew Bible reads, Ki ra'u ba'aron Yehovah. In verse 13, it is told that the people of Bet Shemesh, quote, saw the ark, end quote, in Hebrew, vayir'u et ha'aron. But here they look into, ra'u ba'aron. This may indicate to a different viewing, quote unquote, of the ark, either with contempt, according to Rashi on verse 13 and Ditrani, or viewing it more than it was necessary, according to Ibn Kaspi, seeing it uncovered, according to Targum and Kara, or that they opened it and saw what was inside, according to Kimchi. Gersonides proposed that they did not abandon their harvesting when they saw the ark. Van Staldein Sulman notes another explanation given in a margin of Codex Roechelinianus, quote, because they rejoiced in the destruction of Israel and despised the ark of the Lord when it was exposed, end quote. Although the Septuagint assimilates to verse 13 by rendering they saw the ark, McCarter writes that this may reflect, quote, an attempt to account for the smiting by appeal to cultic taboos, end quote. Auld writes that ra'aba doesn't mean look into, but rather look at or upon with interest or pleasure. And so, quote, it is far from clear why this is so wicked, end quote. Peshitta reads, they feared the ark of the Lord.
So they either didn't celebrate enough or celebrated the wrong way, or maybe they didn't all celebrate, or they did all celebrate and then God got self-conscious.
Yeah.
No-win situations.
I
Hey,
think this
there's
may-
another God is a narcissist bingo.
I think this may go maybe into more of the sense of, or go back to more of like the sacred space issue. in that, you know, there's protocol. You can't just approach or partake of the presence of the god without something there that he's prescribed. And I think that this issue with the ark, bringing about like all this tragedy and death and all that, is a way of demonstrating, hey, you know, you can't treat this lightly, as part of a larger argument of, to the point where we can't even partake of the same temple, you know, because
Yeah.
then we're still going to get in trouble. We're still going to get disease, where calamity will come if we don't do things right.
God is very finicky about protocol, at least for the Jews. He seems to be, you know, not quite as bad for the Philistines because they don't know what they're doing. But yeah.
It's like a tier service, right? Like if you're a Jew, you have to keep these certain rules. If you're a Levite, you have to keep even more rules. If you're a priest, you keep even more rules. And if you break them, it's very harsh.
Now, I also wonder how this fits within the immediate context of that's coming, right? The whole naming of a king, you know, because if the ark is sort of is associated with Yahweh's throne somehow, it's in a way demonstrating how the power of Yahweh does not reside with the king that sits on in Jerusalem, but rather, you know, the God himself. I may be stretching this, but
no, it's one of those things. I don't think it would necessarily have been the original intention of this story at the time it was written, but the overall narrative, where, as we know later, David is the one that restores the ark to the proper tabernacle and the place in Jerusalem and brings it to the city, yada yada yada. Who, you know, there is a judgment and someone is killed, and then he has to figure out what the appropriate ceremonies are. But it binds the line of David more closely with the idea of God's authority, not supplanting, of course, but being considered, you know, more divinely blessed and bound up with the authority of God.
Was your dog barking at my dog, Aaron?
I don't know what he was barking at. I think it was something here.
All right.
Okay, I'll continue on that same verse still, putting 70 of them to death. The Hebrew Bible reads, "And he smote from the people 70 men, 50,000 men," literally. The literal reading seems odd. Some suggested adding a conjunction between the two numbers, reading 70 men and 50,000 men, as we see in Septuagint and Kimchi. Peshitta reads 5,070 men. Some differentiate between the groups of each number. For example, Vulgate reads, "And he slew the people 70 men and 50,000 of the common people." Targum reads, "He killed among the elders of the people 70 men, and among the assembly 50,000 men." Rabbi Abahu and Rabbi Elazar in Talmud Sotah 35b argued whether there were 70 men, each equivalent to 50,000 men, or that there were 50,000 men, each was equivalent to 70 men of the Sanhedrin. Josephus, however, in Antiquities 616, does not mention 50,000 men. This led some commentators, like McCarter and Klein, to see the 50,000 men as a gloss. Bar-Efrat writes that the number 50,000 does not fit a small settlement like Bet Shemesh, and was perhaps added to illustrate the greatness of the smiting. On the other hand, Tsumura notes Oswald T. Alice's support of the Masoretic text, and takes the phrase to mean 50 out of 1,000. Tsumura further writes, "Chamishim could be a form with an enclitic mem, as Shneim Asar, following an ordinal chamishi, fifth, rather than 50, as we see in 2 Samuel 15:7. If this is correct, there would be two possible explanations. One, 1/5 of the clan, as we see in 10:19 and Leviticus 27:32 and Judges 6:15, or two, 5 out of every 1,000 or clan. If one is the case, the clan has 350 men. If 2 is correct, then the total population of the city would be 14,000 or 14 clans. The Mari letters attest to a West Semitic word limum, a clan or a tribal unit. Malamat sees a semantic parallel to this term in the biblical Hebrew elef, since limum and elef both mean a clan and 1,000.
So I'll just point out here that, like at this time in actual history, the largest city in the region would have been Hatzor up until it was destroyed and burned in the 12th century, 13th century. I think it's the 13th century. The total population of this city of Hatzor might have been as high as 15,000 people. It was probably about 10 to 15,000 people. So this was the largest city in the entire region. In and around the late Bronze Age, and I would assume this also holds for the early Iron Age, the first couple hundred years of the kingdom period, the two kingdom period. So the number itself, the 50,000, is clearly ridiculous. And monstrously hyperbolic, even on the explanations by some of the commentators that Tomer brought up to bring this number close to something resembling reality, still look really high to me.
It is remarkable how much a big number like that comes up in the Bible. I'm remembering Jesus Christ Superstar, one of the songs, neither you, Simon, nor the 50,000, nor the Roman, nor the Jews, and so on. What is the numerological significance of that number?
I've already noted some of the opinions, but it could be seen as a hyperbole, or indicating a lot of people, like a typological number.
Yeah.
But we know that the importance of 70, 40, and various other numbers like that for, especially with regard to elders, the 70 elders of Israel, that sort of thing, that's very emblematic. That, God took out their, I guess you could say, their cultural leaders and elders. But then, the 50,000, I'm not familiar with any particular typological equivalent there, aside from just, I killed so many people. It was all the people. Nobody's ever killed this many people before. It was amazing.
My very comprehensive Nat Bible has a note here that says that some medieval Hebrew manuscripts also read just 70.
I noted the Peshitta would read 5,000.
They probably went, wow, that looks ridiculous, and it can't be right too. So
I mean, I noted
but look, the Septuagint says it, so we have to keep it.
I've noted Josephus submitted this number as well.
Yeah.
Okay, my final comment on this chapter, on verse 20, who can stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God? Bar-Efrat writes that this is a rhetorical question, meaning that it is not possible to stand in front of God because of his holiness. He writes that by using the term holy, kadosh, there's an element of awe and horror. Before the presence of the great and holy God, fear and trembling latch onto the person. Tsumura compares the use of the attribute holy of Yahweh to Hannah's prayer in 2:2, and notes that the implication of both events is different. Quote, while on the one hand, Hannah acknowledges Yahweh as the intimate and yet sovereign Lord of hosts, these people somehow lack the proper attitude toward God, not honoring and reverencing the Holy One. The addition of this makes their relationship with God sound more superficial and exhibits a popular conception of kadosh, holiness, that is, taboo. As it was one of the darkest eras of the history of ancient Israel, it is no surprise to find that the spiritual condition of the covenant people was at such low ebb. In light of this, Hannah's prayer, quote-unquote, sticks out. Now the time is ripe for Samuel's new ministry. God has not forgotten his people even in the darkest time.
Did you say did you note the textual variant in 4Q Sam A? on this statement? I didn't.
On
I was
20?
only half paying attention. Yeah.
No, actually, I didn't.
The who is able to stand before this holy Yahweh?
It's missing
So
the extra
they
bit.
omit,
it is
they
also
omit the
yeah.
Elohim.
It is also found in Lucianic recension.
Okay.
Are we ready then
let's-
to move on to
Uh,
1
wait a minute,
Just
Samuel
one
7?
second. I did want to talk about verse 18. So I noticed when you were reading it as well, like you're struggling a little bit. It is written very well, and like it doesn't make a lot of sense, the last bit where it says, so it's like, okay, and the golden mice, their numbers are accorded with blah blah blah, these villages, towns, whatever, and then it says, as far as the great stone on which the ark of the Lord was set down to this day. So what is it talking about when it says to this day? Is it talking about the ark? Is it talking about the stone? Is it talking about that the field still belongs to the guy, to Joshua? Like, it's very weird. And it doesn't. Yeah.
That's also added by the Masoretic text. It's not in the Septuagint.
Oh yeah, it's not in this. Interesting.
It,
Yeah, and
it-
they're not even sure.
yeah,
If the
it's a
words. Yeah.
Deuteronomistic
means.
phrase, but the way it's used there would indicate like that it was written well before it had been taken to the temple. Almost, or we seem to infer that. I mean,
Right. Yeah, it seems to be saying that the ark is still there, but then like we, ready in verse 21, we see the bit about them saying go to Kiriath Jearim, and then chapter 7 we're going to see that it stays in Kiriath Jearim for like 20 years or whatever. Like, so it is a bit weird, like what they're talking about. Like I think traditional commentaries say it's the stone is in the field to this day. But yeah, it's weird.
I mean, there are some commentators who say that the great Abel is the great stone. I think
Yeah, it's either a great stone or it could be a.
they follow
yeah,
the
great.
Targum. Yeah, they
Yeah,
follow the
Abel is
Targum.
either a stone or it could also be a valley. I think who read it earlier from their translation, Mark, right? And your translation actually transliterated it and just said to great Abel or Abel. Yeah. So it's,
Got a comment from Trevor Wright who says, what specifically is the manuscript of Dead Sea Scrolls used for in relation to Israelite culture and practices in those times? And why did it gradually decrease in practice over time? If only we had someone who knew the Dead Sea Scrolls well.
Reverend with the big questions, always.
What specifically is the manuscript of Dead Sea Scrolls used for in relation to Israelite culture and practices in those times? And why did it gradually decrease in I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm if I understand the question.
I think he's asking how do the, if at all, how do the Dead Sea Scrolls shed light on Israelite culture?
Oh boy.
I feel like you could teach an entire university course answering that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
So,
shows the differences. It shows that it's different. They had something different back then, but we also don't know exactly if the community that using that, let's say, canon, if they were using the same canon as, let's say, more mainstream Judaism at the time, or if this was specifically their version, and that's why it's different. It also has books that aren't really considered part of the canon, right?
Well, this is a really complicated question
Don't know
in large part because like scholars nowadays are just, I mean, there's no, virtually everyone has rejected the idea that there's anything even remotely close to resembling a canon.
Right.
Up to the time of Jesus, right? So the writers and the collectors of the Dead Sea Scrolls have reams and reams of individual texts, multiple copies of lots of the same texts, multiple copies of the same texts in pretty dramatically different versions. So like, and then you've got texts, the boundaries between which we define as scripture and not scripture is extremely unclear. So what they do, so they do a couple of things though, like with the wealth of material that we have. These are our oldest biblical manuscripts, Hebrew biblical manuscripts. Well, I guess Greek biblical manuscripts too. So they're our oldest biblical manuscripts. So they are the window, the snapshot into the state of the text at the earliest stage that we have of its preservation. And what we see there is like this tremendous dynamism where there are versions of the text that are starting to congeal and to solidify, but there's multiple versions of the text already at this period. Like the Greek, the Septuagint was translated from forms of the Hebrew text which were pretty dramatically different from, the Masoretic text. And we have copies of both of those of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then you have things like the Samaritan Pentateuch and things like the reworked Pentateuch and things like additional stories and traditions attached to figures from Israelite antiquity, like Jeremiah or Daniel or Joseph or Enoch, or so it's really kind of exploded this whole question. Yeah.
It was always a 3-stage rocket.
I remember seeing the news stories decades ago, several decades ago, that when they were talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls or some new addition to the Dead Sea Scrolls, maybe it was just the entirety of the Dead Sea Scrolls that were discovered, and so they have these like elements of the Bible that were older than the Bible, but for the longest time, for years, the news would say, okay, yeah, experts are studying this, but they're not going to tell us what they say.
Yeah, the publication of the Dead Sea Scrolls was a teeth-pulling process.
Yes. Yeah. So just to give people an idea here. So first of all, what we're talking about when we're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls is tens of thousands of fragments, manuscript fragments, from which scholars have managed to reconstruct approximately 700 or 800 individual scrolls, manuscripts. It's a massive collection, right? It's just an enormous amount of material. The first discoveries were made in 1947, and they made discoveries all the way up to 1953. Like this 6-year period, they discovered this wealth of material, and they put together a publication team with the plan of getting all this stuff out to the public and to the rest of the academic community. There was only like 7 or 8 guys working on the collection during this whole time, from the 50s all the way up until the 1970s, 1980s. And in that period of time, they managed to publish like 7 volumes.
Wow.
Over like a 40-year period. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so just to give you an idea, like the entire collection, all the Dead Sea Scrolls have now been officially published. The series consists of 40 volumes. So they had like 7 of them done by 1980, 1987.
They clearly needed more hands on deck.
Clearly.
And the thing is that how long that process took also spurred a lot of conspiracy theories.
It sure did.
Of course. Yes, scholarship takes too long. It must be alien, Illuminati, reptoid, hacker armies, right?
Yeah. Well, even among scholars, this was just a massive issue, right? Because what was happening was you had lots of legitimate scholars who were eager to get a look at this material and were basically prevented from doing so.
That just so stokes all of the conspiracy theories.
it totally does. It doesn't help, and it fed into like the work was all being done at the École Biblique, which is the French school, the Dominican French School of Archaeology, in East Jerusalem, and it's a Dominican school. Most of the editorial team were Catholics. There were no Jewish people on the editorial team until 1991, I think. It just it was bad. It was really bad. And then I'll say this one more thing, and then we need to continue. But I think it was 89 or 90, the supervisor, the chief editor of the Dead Sea Scrolls, his name was John Strugnall, and he gave an interview in the Biblical Archaeology Review. It's a periodical on biblical archaeology, and in this interview, he went on this brutal anti-Semitic screed, and which of course, as you can imagine, that also helped a lot.
Oh, goody.
So he was pretty promptly fired after that, but yeah, it was bad.
So is it possible that a Christian research group mostly might have made some unprofessional choices with regard to which scrolls to do first, or which ones to not do, or anything? Is it possible there's something could have happened?
I don't know,
Damage or something.
The order in which these came out, the first volume was everything from Cave 1 except for the Great Isaiah Scroll, and then volume 2 was everything that was found at Mutabat. Volume 3 was the Copper Scroll. Volume 4 was I don't remember what volume 4 was. Volume 5 was the Psalm Scroll from Cave 11, I think. 4 and 5, I think, were either Samuel and 4Q Samuel A and the Cave 11 Psalm Scroll. I don't remember what was in volume 6. And then volume 7 was a bunch of stuff from Cave 4. So it didn't like the order of the publication suggests that it wasn't so much people were holding stuff back. Oh, sorry, volume 5 was that was the crazy one by Allegro. But anyways, it doesn't look that way. Like when you look at the actual stuff that was coming out over this time, it's pretty random. So yeah,
but like everything in Cave 1 except for the Great Isaiah Scroll, which wasn't published until when?
But we did have very early. I think it was in the late 50s. They had already published like photographic plates of everything in the Great Isaiah Scroll, as well as the Community Rule, and I think the Habakkuk commentary.
Yeah, I guess they wouldn't have. They could have got away with it.
Those scrolls
the
were
parts
actually
we all
owned by
predicted.
I'm sorry that I'm interjecting. I feel like we're talking off topic like for 10 minutes.
We are. And just to move it along, we do
my
have
favorite
one more
subject,
question related to the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Oh, good. Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to get a drink of water. I'll be right back.
Utanaska 621 says,
Aniska.
were the Dead Sea Scrolls an internet archive of the writings in that area? Or do we think do they keep everything they could find?
I mean, it's a library, right? Like it's a collection of literature compiled by this ascetic group of Jews we call the Essenes. So
not Hasidic.
Not Hasidic, no.
Ascetic.
Yeah, I know.
Ascetic.
Just in case someone
Yes.
might misheard. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know.
And so, this collection, this was just like, was anything that was written that's in this cave is part of this library. So it's not all necessarily scripture.
No, like here's the thing too, right? Like out of those like 800 or so manuscripts, anywhere, depending on how you count the stuff, anywhere from 230 to maybe 300 of them are copies of texts that are in our Bibles, like in the Old Testament. The rest of it was a whole bunch of, some of it is text that we knew of before, like First Enoch or Jubilees, but a lot of it is stuff that nobody had ever seen before, which made it pretty exciting.
And it didn't include the part that I was hoping for when they finally published it. It didn't give the line about any resemblance to any characters, living or dead, is purely unintentional.
You didn't have
Although I
to
do want to
worry
point
about
out
getting
that
sued.
the meaning of scripture changes from community to community. It's any text that is viewed as whether it be holy or authoritative. So whether or not they accepted certain texts as scripture is a different question than if there is anything, how much of the stuff was in there that modern believers would include in their canon, which is a closed book of scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I will just say, if anybody is interested in this topic, I have many videos on my channel about the Dead Sea Scrolls.
You're something of an expert on the subject, aren't you?
A little
He
bit,
has a Nobel Prize, yeah.
That's what it's for. Yes.
Okay. Then we have a comment. We have a comment from Mr. Smith who says, "Weren't some of the writings apocryphal?"
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Many.
Got it.
All right. So who's reading chapter 7?
Wait. Before we read chapter 7, I have 2 more comments by Christians. Gregory the Great writes that symbolized by milk cows, the faithful of the church carry the ark of God in their hearts as they journey without deviation toward God. And Justin Martyr writes that when the cows halted at the farm of Hoshea, a man sharing Joshua's former name, it was revealed they were guided by the powerful name of Jesus. There, I'm done.
Okay. So, moving on to what is it? 1 Samuel.
1 Samuel 7. Let's go.
Yeah. So the men of Kiriath Jearim came and took up the ark of the Lord. They brought it to Abinadab's house on the hill and consecrated Eleazar his son to guard the ark of the Lord. The ark remained at Kiriath Jearim a long time, 20 years in all. That's a long time. So when Jesus says he's coming back very soon, okay, never mind. Then all the people of Israel turned back to the Lord. So Samuel said to the Israelites, "If you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, then rid yourselves of the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths, and commit yourselves to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines." So the Israelites put away their Baals and their Ashtoreths and served the Lord only. Then Samuel said, "Assemble all Israel at Mizpah, and I will intercede with the Lord for you." When they had assembled at Mizpah, they drew water and poured it out before the Lord. On that day they fasted, and there they confessed, "We have sinned against the Lord." Now Samuel was serving as leader. Funny how interceding with God will do that for you. As leader of Israel at Mizpah. When the Philistines heard that Israel had assembled at Mizpah, the rulers of the Philistines came up to attack them. When the Israelites heard of it, they were afraid because of the Philistines. They said to Samuel, "Do not stop crying out to the Lord our God for us, that he may rescue us from the hand of the Philistines." Then Samuel took a suckling lamb and sacrificed it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. He cried out to the Lord on Israel's behalf, and the Lord answered him. While Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to engage Israel in battle. But that day the Lord thundered with a cloud of thunder against the Philistines and threw them into such a panic that they were routed before the Israelites. Oh no, it's raining! The men of Israel rushed out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines, slaughtering them all along the way to a point below Beth-kar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen. He called it Ebenezer, saying, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued, and they stopped invading Israel's territory. Throughout Samuel's lifetime, the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines. The towns of Ekron to Gath that the Philistines had captured from Israel were restored to Israel. And Israel delivered the neighboring territory into the hands of the Philistines. And there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. Samuel continued as Israel's leader all the days of his life. From year to year, he went on a circuit from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah, judging Israel in all those places. But he always went back to Ramah, where his home was, and there he also held court for Israel, and he built an altar there to the Lord. Bollocks!
No, he didn't have any bullocks. He just burnt a lamb really quick. You ever wonder if God picks, like in these stories, if God's picking who he's going to support in the battle, and he's like, oh, I mean, these guys are offering sacrifices to me, but also there's more of the other guys. So if I boost them, I get a higher kill count.
Oh, we can't fight Israel. It's raining. Run away, run away. And then Matt White puts in a comment, says, Aaron, putting Catholics to translate ancient scrolls, do you want P-towns? Because that's how you get P-towns.
Oh, bless his heart. I don't think he ever looked into the translation of anything like the process. He just has his bibble and bibble's gonna bibble.
That's about all he has. Yeah. Although, shout out to Mark S. Smith, Catholic, who does a lot of phenomenal work.
Yeah.
Listen, there's a ton of excellent Catholic biblical scholars. There's lots of them.
First one that always comes to my mind is Mark S. Smith, though.
Yeah. No, he's amazing.
Okay, I'll start my commentary, I guess. First on verse 1, Abinadav. Auld notes that the house of Abinadav is known from the main source of the ark, as we see in 2 Samuel 6:3, but there his sons are called Uzzah and Achio. Klein writes that the house, quote-unquote, of Abinadav could be construed as a sanctuary associated with this otherwise unknown person, just as Micah's sanctuary was called the house of Micah in Judges 17:12 and 18:2. On verse 2, 20 years. Klein notes that the 20 years here do not fit with DH's overall chronological scheme, according to which 480 years elapsed from the Exodus until the time Solomon built the temple, in 1 Kings 6:1. He writes, quote, in this scheme, 45 years passed between the Exodus and the conquest, 253 years are allotted to the period of oppression of the rest of the saviors, quote-unquote, of pre-monarchic Israel. 136 years were presided over by minor judges, quote-unquote, and 46 years are assigned to the kings up to Solomon's 4th year, end quote. He writes that the 20 years, quote, denotes the time of oppression in the typical Deuteronomistic sequence. Sin, oppression, cry to Yahweh, deliverance. Its import is theological rather than historical, end quote. McCarter writes that 20 years is probably a late insertion in the account, either Deuteronomistic or at least in the spirit of the Deuteronomistic chronological system. Some traditional commentators see the 20 years as not representing literal 20 years. Gersonides, for example, writes that the ark rested there for more than 20 years until the day David ruled Hebron. He proposed that there was a period when both Samson and Eli ruled together, and Samuel was born before Eli began judging the Israelites.
No,
yeah.
sorry. I just have to say, like, I'm often surprised at even like uh solid commenters and scholars of the Bible. I'm often it still does take me aback a little bit how many of them are working as hard as they can uh to make the numbers work and the dates and to align some of this stuff with some semblance of historical reality. It's I don't know, it's just so much easier and a much simpler explanation to just say, look, they got so much of this stuff just dead wrong. Just dead wrong.
It's
Anyway.
yeah, when you no longer believe, you can be honest. It's such a relief. I didn't realize how dishonest I had been forcing myself to be about everything to try and make it fit into what I felt obligated to believe. And like even to see scholars enslaved to that, it's awful. It's so
Well,
much easier if you just don't have to try and pretend it's fits and it's all real and good and valid.
yeah, absolutely. I do think that because in like other fields of archaeology, myth is actually in biblical archaeology and scholarship too. Myth is still used as like a part of like understanding the ancient past, right? So like, yeah, obviously they got a ton of stuff wrong and they made up a lot of things. But I think the exploration, at least, trying to see like, well, where are the like, are there any kernels of truth? Where are they? Because like for some of it, right? Like once we get to the David stuff, like we can start
Oh
verifying
yeah.
quite a bit of it, right? Like especially like
Agreed. Yep.
the King's period, we can start verifying a bunch of it. So like trying to find where that line is, and it's not necessarily like a single cutoff point, right?
No,
Because like
no.
just be so like we didn't have before, like what is it, like the Mesha steel, right? Like we didn't have like any physical like evidence of like a King David, right? um and but we still have like all these stories about him. So it's maybe in the future we'll find something that's older that might corroborate like a little portion of this or something, but you're not going to get some of it we know is just straight up false, right? Like when they're talking about like not only there's the numbers, but when we're talking about like where people resided, we have excavated these places and seen no human habitation in these periods. So like, yeah, obviously some of it is just made up. But like
Were
trying
you
to
there?
find that, yeah, we're using, yeah.
The rocks were there.
There's a lot of cool stuff when you're trying to see like, well, where does the myth begin and where does the history start, or vice versa.
I
But
guess by the time of Samuel, you are at least approaching the time where it's going to start touching on something based in reality soon. Although I mean they do list cultic sites, which were cultic sites, so that's something.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, I don't know. I'm part of I'm part of a school, I guess, of thinking among scholars that really you can start talking about the history of Israel and reconstructing the history of Israel once you get to about the 8th century, maybe the 9th century. So like this is long after,
yeah, no,
any
with
King
that, and
David or
I
any King
entirely agree with that.
Solomon.
Yeah,
And
like the
yeah,
actual history,
so
absolutely.
everything, and I think most scholars would say, like, some of this stuff is, yeah, as Lawrence said, some of this stuff probably reflects things that happened similar to the way they're reported or recorded, but there's just no access point, right? Like we just have no
No.
way. And there's the archaeological picture at this point too. It does get confusing in terms of what we're unearthing at sites and seeing in terms of the demographic picture of settlement and the types of material culture that we're finding doesn't seem to align really closely to things that are reported for this period.
Yeah,
I think it's fun.
It is,
I'll just say this one more thing. I think it's fun that, in my opinion, probably the best early attested figure from the Bible is Balaam, the son of Beor, the prophet from
Yeah,
Moab.
actually, yeah.
I think that's
That's
amazing,
hilarious.
right? And I think it's amazing that the text that I'm talking about is the Dear Allah inscription. It's 8th century, I believe. And the story in the inscription actually looks a little bit like it's a vision, right, of Balaam, and it looks a little bit like some of the visions that are recorded in the book of Numbers belonging to Balaam. But the other really cool thing about it is that there's no Yahweh at all
Oh God, no.
in the Dear Allah inscription. It's a divine council. There's other deities involved. It's fun. So
yeah, and
sorry, I'm done now.
I did like a presentation on that when we did the Numbers 22.
Oh,
you can
good.
find the
Nice.
presentation on my channel. But yeah, it's really fascinating stuff.
It is.
Okay,
And I just wanted to interject that there was
Sorry,
a thing in
Tomer.
some older cultures where, you'd have stories that would be passed down, and there wasn't that same idea of history as we have now. You would just change the name of the king in the story to be whatever the local current king was, because, you just wanted a king that everyone knew. It didn't matter. The point was the story and the gods and the icons and the ideas. So yeah, like that affects it too. So, who knows how old the roots of whatever Snopes effect we're dealing with here. It's certainly not not a history textbook.
Yeah, these texts reflect the time that they were written in more than the time that they are
Yes.
portraying.
Yes.
okay, I think we should move on. Okay, I'm not gonna stay off topic again. Okay, on verse 5, Mitzpah. Tsumura comments, thank you, Peter. Mitzpah is probably modern Tel en Nasba, 7.5 miles northwest of Jerusalem. It was a place of assembly for all Israel, quote unquote, in Judges 20-21 and 1 Samuel 10, verses 17 to 27. Samuel is said to have gone yearly on a circuit from Bethel to Gilgal to Mitzpah to judge Israel, according to verse 16. Later, Saul was appointed king here in 1017. In the monarchical period, its major importance was as Judah's northernmost border fortress. It was fortified early in the 9th century by Asa as a result of his disputes with Baasha of Israel, as in 1 Kings 15, verses 16 through 22. On verse 6, they drew water and poured it out before the Lord. We do not find a similar ritual in the Bible, excluding 2 Samuel 23:16, where David is pouring water to the Lord out of respect for 3 warriors who brought him water from Bethlehem. According to Mishnah Sukkah 4:9, people used to pump and pour water during Sukkoth, probably to ask for rain, according to Bar-Efrat. Kimchi writes that the pouring of water is a symbol for atonement, while Rashi writes that this was a sign of humility, i.e., quote, we are before you like these poured out waters, end quote. Tsumura notes that Gordon, or I think R.P. Gordon, takes the water pouring act as the act of, quote, the self-denial of the occasion as the participants solemnly proclaim their abstention from even this necessity of life, end quote. And accepts here, quote, a fertility significance in that the God of Israel, and not Baal or Ashtaroth, to compare verse 4, is acknowledged as the true source of life and fertility, end quote. On verse 9, Samuel took a suckling lamb and sacrificed it. Klein writes that the exact significance of offering a suckling lamb is unknown, although such sacrifices were known, as seen in Leviticus 22:27, where a bull, sheep, or goat must remain for 7 days with its mother before it would become an acceptable offering to Yahweh. On verse 11, Beth-Kar, the city is not mentioned elsewhere in the Bible, and its location is unknown. Septuagint has Beth Kor, and according to Klein, some took it as Beth Horon the Lower. McCarter and Tsumura reject seeing Beth-Kar as a corruption of Beth-El. Other identifications include Ein Karim and Ra'as Karkar. Targum reads Beth Sharon, a city in the coastal area. Van Staldein Sulman writes that while this satisfies the strategical needs in 1 Samuel 7, it does not agree with the archaeological point of view. Peshitta reads Beth Yashan.
So who
It
was
sounds
that?
Klingon to me.
Bethsel. Who is that? Bethsel Dinosaur Man?
Oh.
No. And now on verse 12.
Not even going to tell me.
No. We don't know.
So
Yeah.
he's
It's a
Dinosaur Man
mystery.
from now on.
If you want to, fine. On verse... yeah. Okay. On verse 12, in Hebrew, shen, literally tooth. Traditional commentators like Rashi, Kara, and Kimchi took it as referring to the shape or peak of the rock. Septuagint reads the old city, reading Yeshana. Peshitta reads Bet Yashan, again. Following that, McCarter amended the city's name to be Jeshana, mentioned also in 2 Chronicles 13:19. He writes that it has been identified with Isanas, the site of the victory of Herod the Great, and modern Burj el Isane, 17 miles north of Jerusalem. Klein, however, notes that Burj el Isane is on the road to Shiloh, and since it is likely that the Philistines would have fled to the west, it does not fit geographically. He renders the crag and writes that it refers to a geological or geographical feature that cannot be identified. Tsumura takes Shen to be an example of phonetic spelling and renders Jeshen. On verse 13, throughout Samuel's lifetime, this seems to contradict later events in the book of Samuel, where the Philistines are described as controlling Israel and pressing it. Kimchi suggested reading all the days of Samuel as until Samuel was old, since he couldn't rebuke the Israelites when he was an elder. Garsiel proposed that all the days of Samuel does not indicate a specific time frame, but rather an expression to describe a long period of time. Klein writes that verses 13 and 14, quote, report the age's theological interpretation of Samuel's victory rather than its actual historical accomplishments, unquote. On verse 14, and there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. The Amorites are mentioned in Samuel only here and in 2 Samuel 21:2, where the Gibeonites are described as part of the Amorites. Kimchi writes that he has no idea why they are mentioned, since there is no mention of a war between Israel and the Amorites. He proposed that while the Philistines fought Israel, they also fought the Amorites, who remained in the land with the Danites, according to Judges 1:34 and 36. And when the Amorites saw that the Philistines surrendered, they made peace with Israel. As noted by various commentators, the Amorites in DH denote the inhabitants of land before the Israelite conquest. Tsumura writes that this clause intends to portray Israel as safe both internally and externally. And finally, on verses 15 through 17, McCarter comments, these remarks provide an editorial transition from the close of the account of Samuel's career, as signaled by the formulaic summation in verses 13 to 14, to the events of chapter 8. Such a transition is required because in 8:1 we find the great prophet an old man, and it is clear that a long time has passed. It seems likely that the prophetic author of the foregoing told other tales about Samuel, but the Deuteronomistic editor, whose hand can be recognized in the formulaic verse 15, has not preserved them. Instead, we are presented with a summary. In the stories that follow, and probably also in stories that have not been preserved, Samuel appears at a variety of places, including Mitzpah in the present chapter, as well as the account of Saul's election in 10 verses 17 to 27, Gilgal, where the kingship is renewed, quote unquote, in 11 14 to 15, and Saul's disobedience as is recorded in chapters 13 and 15, and Bethel, nowhere in the extant tradition, though many episodes occur in its vicinity, as well as Ramah, Samuel's home. Viewed critically, this variety of appearances is to be explained as a result of the editorial pattern of the larger narrative, which tends to subject everything to the supervision of Samuel. A Deuteronomistic hand has harmonized the several accounts by explaining that Samuel exercised his sacral and political authority on an annual circuit. End quote.
Has
That's
anybody
it.
said anything about uh, the potential literary significance of Samuel always returning to Rama, because I feel like this. I'm kind of interested to take a look, because I feel like this is something that repeats itself, some consistency throughout the narrative. It's interesting to me.
Something that I don't know if I'm just kind of associating things here, but the whole circuit that is described in verse what is it 16, it kind of reminds me of what the Egyptian pharaohs would do whenever they were just campaigning. They would travel the land and make several stops and go up and down the land of Egypt, campaigning or holding festivals. Or so I don't know. It seems like maybe perhaps Samuel is sort of fulfilling this sort of prophetic, kingly type of role before we actually have an official king. Is that possible?
Well, importantly, these are all cult sites, right? So these are all places where there's shrines, or worship installations of some sort.
So it'd be more
So,
for
yeah.
religious purposes than political.
Well, yeah, but of course,
Those
like
weren't really
the
different things at
relationship,
that time.
not really. Like the relationship between the two is at the time is often indistinguishable. So, yeah, but this is this is one of the I'm sure this is something that Lawrence talked about in his introduction to the Deuteronomistic history, which I didn't watch, but I'm sure this came up where this is a strong focal point of the Deuteronomistic reforms is cult centralization, right? It's all about everything back into Jerusalem and to the temple that's in Jerusalem, which is quite different from how a lot of the Hebrew Bible texts themselves present the religious picture, and quite different from the archaeological picture of the religious landscape, where there were all sorts of shrines and temples and
Yeah.
what we call high places all over the place,
Cultic
where people
sites. Yeah.
yes, where people were performing religious rites to all sorts of different gods, including Yahweh, importantly. So this seems to be reflective of some sort of Iron Age historical reality, right? But the Deuteronomist is doing everything he can to walk back or steer away from that religious reality, to say no, it all just has to take place here in the temple in Jerusalem and nowhere
There's an
else.
interesting kind of tension that I've noticed in these retconned explanations, because the original form was that there were sacred sites and shrine areas and areas that were considered sanctified, and you would worship several gods there. And there, the local Yahweh, and Asherah was his wife. And every time they talk about burning the Asherah poles, I'm like, wow, okay, he is not taking the divorce well. But but at the same time, they're trying to be like, no, we were always supposed to worship in the one area, and this is a later thing. But maybe something good also happened there, because like an important judge lived there and was there a lot. So that's why your grandma had this tradition. So she's not actually a bad person, but it was a later perversion and we can't do it. So there's sort of like, you're trying to give a little, but also no, but and set up the idea that your version was the original version when it clearly wasn't. It's very contrived once you have a little information about the older religious practices. It's just very contrived.
Before we move on to the next chapter, I have some Christians to cite. Okay, so first, Gregory the Great writes that the ark's 20-year rest in Kiryat Yarim represents a time of spiritual contemplation. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. You kind of went funny for a second, but it was only for a little bit.
Ah, okay. You don't want me to repeat, right?
It's okay. Whatever you
Okay.
want.
Okay. I've mentioned Gregory the Great. Now, Bede writes that Samuel's priesthood prefigures Jesus as he instructs the people to redirect their works and their hearts towards God. Yeah. Jerome writes that Ebenezer, meaning the stone of help, signifies Christ in fulfillment of Psalms 117:22. And Augustine writes that the erection of the stone symbolizes how conversion shifts one's focus from earthly happiness to spiritual.
Yeah, an
There, I'm
erection
done.
can do that.
Yeah, I knew it.
Oh, gotta love spiritual happiness. Don't take pleasure on the earth. Just be happy with your servitude, and someday you will be rewarded. Jam tomorrow, everyone. Keep pushing
Yeah,
those chains down.
I always felt this as being a type of snobbery, like, oh, listening to classical music is a higher level of joy or
It is.
enjoyment.
Yeah,
you know?
Tomer.
It is, but
It's
like you don't have to be a
spiritual.
snob to enjoy it. You can enjoy
Actually, you
it.
do.
Yeah, you do actually.
Just kidding.
Bullshit. You can headbang
No.
to Mozart.
You can head back to Stravinsky. Okay, I'm moving on.
All right. So hopping into chapter 8, I do want to point
Aaron,
out
you're
that
muted. Wait. Aaron is muted.
Ooh,
So I was. Yeah, I was going to say Septic Flesh did a really nice album with a full-on orchestra. If you like blending your death metal with classical.
Who is that?
Septic Flesh.
Oh,
gonna have
okay.
to
Yeah, but
listen to
it
some
really
Septic
sounds
Flesh.
great. Having a full orchestra for death metal band is just awesome.
I have sung with an orchestra, and having like the brass and a full percussion, like romantic era percussion and brass behind you, is just like riding a wave of power. It's amazing. Love
Well,
it.
then, really quick, let's just throw out my favorite Tim Minchin song is where he's also accompanied by a full-on orchestra, and it's "Thank You God," and it is so great. If you've not heard it, Tim Minchin, "Thank You God." It's with the full it's just amazing.
thank you, God, for curing cataracts.
Fixing the cataracts of Sam's
Oh, yeah.
mom. Da, 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 da.
That's it.
Okay,
Sing
so
along with it.
who's reading the next chapter?
I don't know, but it should be known that with chapter 8, there has historically been quite a lot of disagreement. Some people, I think Wellhausen even saw this as like, oh, something pre-Deuteronomistic, because, well, like the tendencies in this chapter, essentially, the people are sick of these judges and they want a king. Now, God's whole point is like, well, you're not gonna like a king, but give it to him anyways. So
He gets really
there,
pissy and jealous about it, though.
yeah, there is like this feeling of this anti-monarchy stuff. So some people have both seen this as like pre-Deuteronomistic, and some people have seen this as like post-exilic, because like at that point in time, there would be no monarchy, and they'd be like, well, we need something new, so they write a text like this. The thing is, this is a very Deuteronomistic chapter. There are so many phrases here that are indicative of of the Deuteronomist, that it should be viewed as part of that work. So
It's so hard to reconcile the "you ungrateful bastards, you want a king, fine, he's gonna fuck you up" angle that God takes in this chapter with the entire previous book of Judges, or obviously skipping Ruth, where every time something fucked up happened, they're like, but hey, Israel had no king, everyone did whatever they wanted, it was a fucked up time, What you gonna do? I'm like, pick a struggle.
yeah, there are so many times where the actual this is kind of what really points to multiple authors having they're putting in their own 2 cents, is that they disagree on even the most critical stuff like that, because a lot of it seems to, like, this entire narrative, well, we can just call it the king's narrative, right? Like, it's hinging on the importance and the value of kingship. So, and like what that does to a nation. So there has been historically a lot of argument over this chapter and how it's been used.
Apparently, even in the text itself. So
I find it very interesting too how Yahweh is recorded here telling Samuel that is not you they've rejected, but me, and that they've done it since I got them out of Egypt. In that it's equating it to idolatry almost.
We haven't even read this chapter.
No, we not yet.
okay, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't.
But yeah, I
comment
just
on it
needed
before we
people
read
to
it.
know how important it actually was to the critical issues.
There.
Who wants to read from the Hawaiian Pidgin Bible?
No,
I think
Pigeon Bible.
I think Kip
That
actually
time
wanted to
when
read from
Samuel
Hawaiian
come
Pidgin
old, he
Bible.
make his boys. Oh, whatever.
I'm happy to.
It's very good.
Sorry, I'm happy to read. Sorry, can I? And then I have to say I'm probably going to have to run in about 20 minutes or so. I have another stream to get ready for. I also wanted to say I think Mr. Smith's comment, Nirvana in Deutero, is quite brilliant. Thank you for that. But yeah, I can read chapter 8, and I'll be reading from the JPS 1985 version.
That's a weird way to pronounce Hawaiian Pidgin Bible, but okay.
I know, right? But
And he's going to be reading in the voice of Ralph Wiggum.
no. Well, what are you saying about my voice, Aaron?
No, it was a suggestion.
Oh, really?
No, it was not a
Okay.
serious suggestion. I was just trying to be funny.
I laughed.
I have to read this
Okay.
whole comment since we didn't. So
right.
SJL says, how come nobody wants to read from the Hawaiian Pidgin Bible? Den God tell, I like light for shine, and the light start to shine. Okay, so I've read the whole thing.
yeah, no, maybe not.
Okay, I don't know. I mean, the Hawaiian Pidgin Bible is awesome, but I prefer the Lolcats Bible. Ceiling Cat rode an invisible bike over to Waters.
I mean, we're
Should I
all
read it?
almost done with our Sunday show, so why not the Hawaiian Pidgin Bible, Aaron? Couldn't be worse than the Book of Mormon.
My favorite
No.
is still the Brick Bible, but it's way over there. So I will
Yeah,
just
and
read
you got to look at the pictures.
the JPS. That's true. Okay.
Oh, maybe do the
Are we
Brick
ready to
Bible,
go?
yeah.
Yes, go ahead, please.
I have to get up and grab it though.
No,
so-
just I know you're running short on time, so let's go ahead
Yeah.
and read.
Okay. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Yoel, and his second son's name was Abijah. They sat as judges in Beersheba, but his sons did not follow in his ways. They were bent on gain. They accepted bribes and they subverted justice. All the elders of Israel assembled and came to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, "You have grown old." That's what my kids tell me all the time. "And your sons have not followed your ways. Therefore, appoint a king for us to govern us like all the other nations." Samuel was displeased that they said, "Give us a king to govern us." Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord replied to Samuel, "Heed the demand of the people in everything they say to you. For it is not you that they have rejected, it is me they have rejected as their king. Like everything else they have done ever since I brought them out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and worshiping other gods. So they are doing to you.
Ungrateful
Heed their
bastards.
Right? Yes.
Totally.
Heed their demand, but warn them solemnly and tell them about the practices of any king who will rule over them. It's like the parable of the trees and the bush all over again. Trees and the thistle. Sorry.
Yes.
Samuel reported all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This will be the practice of the king who will rule over you. He will take your sons and appoint them as his charioteers and his horsemen, and they will serve as outrunners for his chariots. He will appoint them as his chiefs of thousands and of fifties, or they will have to plow his fields, reap his harvest, and make his weapons and the equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters as perfumers, cooks, and bakers." Yeah, that's it. Perfumers,
Yeah,
cooks, and
that's
bakers.
totally what he meant.
He will seize your choice fields, vineyards, and olive groves, and he will give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 part of your grain and vintage and give it to his eunuchs and courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves, your choice young men, and your asses, and he'll put those
Uh-huh.
asses to work for him. He will take 1/10 part of your flocks, and that you shall become his slaves. The day will come when you cry out because of the king whom you yourselves have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you on that day. I was just reading straight out of the book of Deuteronomy here, isn't he?
Not really.
But
There's quite a lot of
Yeah.
it's
There are
a
some,
lot.
but not really.
But the people would not listen to Samuel's warning. No, they said, "We must have a king over us, that we may be like all the other nations. Let our king rule over us and go out at our head and fight our battles." When Samuel heard all that the people said, he reported it to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Heed their demands and appoint a king for them." So Samuel then said to the men of Israel, "All of you, go home." The end.
I used to think this chapter was so unbelievable. Like, why would people like choose to have a king over themselves? But you know, current events.
Well,
makes me
Yeah.
think that.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, there you go. Right.
It is wish to be a
Uh,
slave.
Yeah, there's quite a bit here. So one of the things I found really interesting was so in the first 3 verses, you have these kids being judges, but they're awful. So the people get sick of it, right? But the language that's used there, Van Setters actually points out. He notes that the reference to Beersheba is anachronistic, and that the Deuteronomists likely borrowed the motif of the rebellious sons from the story of Eli.
Yeah,
Which I
sure.
thought that was pretty good. Van Setter's always solid. So there is, I mean, yeah, and then you go through it like serving other gods, especially, and I brought them up out of Egypt. And then you have the references to the chariots and the horsemen,
Mhm.
and then the what was it, the yeah, and then you have like essentially, he's taking a 1/10 of your flocks, so you have like some maybe a kind of tax or something. But like either way, like they will not like a king. um I do think that this is a more or less a unity. And then there's a very interesting passage here from this is Mackenzie's paper, The Trouble with Kingship. This chapter is a literary unity, or sorry, is a literary unit. How is the tension regarding the reason for the people's request and God's response to it be explained? Recent scholars have pointed out that it is the people's request for a king, not the institution of a monarchy per se, that is condemned as rejection. and abandonment of Yahweh. Although there is no explanation as to why the request is evil, there are hints. Verse 20 reveals the real reason for the people's request. They want a king to fight their battles. Their request evinces a lack of faith in Yahweh. By placing their trust in a human leader, they abandon Yahweh just as they have abandoned him previously by trusting other gods. This allusion to apostasy also shows that their urge to be like the nations is an implicit rejection of the uniqueness of Yahweh and his desire for the distinctiveness of his people, which, if we have learned nothing from the text that we've read so far, was kind of like their thing. They always found ways to differentiate themselves from the groups around them, whether that be through different types of worship, or like, we're going to get this more and more in the prophets, but when they start being like super and iconic, so they're all like, oh yeah, these images are horrible, like they are just like, they have ears but they don't hear, they have eyes but they don't see, right? So like they were always looking for ways to differentiate themselves from everyone around them.
Oh my God, they were hipsters.
Yeah. So Lawrence, you will appreciate this because you're reading Stavrokopoulos's dissertation right now. But as I after reading her book last week, I've started to really focus in the Deuteronomistic history on this feature that I'm now seeing everywhere, and I'm seeing it in this text too, where this has a like the Deuteronomist has a deep concern with alliances with outsiders. Like this is a big deal for him, and I think she's probably right that the cultic reforms of Hezekiah and Josiah, in contrast to someone like Manasseh, have a lot to do with this, with the fact that, you know, they're not playing nice with their neighbors, and Yahweh likes it a lot when, you know, you don't play nice with your neighbors. The bad kings are like the guys who are, you know, getting along with the Moabites and the Philistines.
He really
and
does
the
hate
Edomites.
human cooperation.
There's even
Yeah,
that redemption arc in Chronicles for Manasseh.
Yes, exactly, right?
Yeah, that was,
Yeah,
you
let's
know,
also
he was
remember
being all...
in the Tower of Babel, what is it that God punishes men for?
Mm-hmm.
Cooperating.
Yeah.
Actually,
Which
it's
is
really... Sorry,
I was just going to say that's a direct, the Tower of Babel story as it appears in Genesis is a direct polemic against Nebuchadnezzar's building activities. But
yeah, but it definitely has that xenophobic element of like, don't cooperate with anybody else.
It totally does.
Absolutely. Yep. But it's something that I see a lot throughout the history of religion in ways and places, just in the popular mind. Sometimes I just watch goofy things, and like there's a lot of Christian exploitation movies that have been out in the last 15 years. You know, your God's Not Dead stuff, and like even your oh, that is, yeah.
I learned yesterday they're making a God's Not Dead 5. I couldn't believe it.
Oh,
it's crazy.
5? They're up to 5?
The only good one was the one they hated.
It's like the Fast and Furious franchise of Christian exploitation films.
It's just
I have
persecution.
to tell you that I saw God's Not Dead, the first one. I saw that one at an American Atheist National Convention, where they had the guys that do the Trace Billieu and Frank Conniff, the voices for the robots in Mystery Science Theater 3000. They had those guys up on stage riffing on that movie as it was going on. It was fucking brilliant. It was 1,000 people in the audience. That was the best way to see that movie.
Man, where can I find that? This has to be out on the internet somewhere.
This is crazy. So apparently the first God's Not Dead came out in 2014. So it's been 10 years. We're apparently getting a 5th movie, and we only
Yeah.
just now got a 4th installment of Kung Fu Panda.
Do we know if there's a new
I mean,
script for
obviously,
the
the
fifth
Canada is
one?
superior.
I'm sorry
Lawrence?
that I'm interjecting.
I know.
Lawrence?
Can I please get back to you and finish my point quickly? I promise.
Yes, sorry, Lilith.
Like, even if you get to like Left Behind, like the Kirk Cameron version, back before 9/11, where he's got the bad guy is always like tolerance, open-mindedness, unity, and you're like, dude, that's your bad guy. He had to like like no. But that is the vice. That is the dear God, no, not equality and unity and tolerance. All the time. It's a theme forever. It's ridiculous. Anyway, that was
Okay.
my point. It's a thing.
Okay, without further ado, I'll start my commentary.
Will you hurry up and start your commentary? What are you holding us up for?
Uh-huh.
Oh, no.
Yeah, oh no. First, on verse 1, Samuel appointed his sons as Israel's leaders, i.e. judges. Tsumura comments, it was unusual for a judge to appoint his own sons as judges, for judgeship was not hereditary. In fact, Gideon refused the suggestion that he establish a dynasty, as we see in Judges 8, verses 22 to 23. Though Eli judged, quote-unquote, Israel for 40 years, according to 1 Samuel 4:18, his sons are never said to have judged. Their priesthood was, of course, hereditary. It may be that the narrator calls the audience's attention to this new development. That is, a hereditary succession, according to Herzberg, in the political history of ancient Israel. Gordon, I think R.P. Gordon, sees here Samuel's little dynastic experiment, quote-unquote. This experiment, quote-unquote, of Samuel's was certainly a breach of the old practice of waiting for the divine appointment of a new judge and was possibly a cause of his family problems. It certainly foreshadows the problems of hereditary kingship in obviating divine choice. Note that the term he appointed, root shin yud mem, is used again in verse 5 for appointing a king. On verse 2, they served at Be'er-sheva. Gersonides wrote that Samuel placed his sons at Beer-sheva to the south so that they'll relieve him from the duties of a judge at that area. Kimchi and Abravanel wrote that they were acting as a replacement for Samuel and settled in Beer-sheva, which is at the edge of the land, to force Israel to come to them and increase their wealth. So they're doing it out of evil. Kimchi suggested that one should have been appointed in Dan while the other in Beer-sheva, a suggestion which Josephus, in Antiquity 632, states as a fact. McCarter notes that some see the mention of Beer-sheva here as indicating a southern connection in the Samuel tradition. However, others regarded it as, quote, totally artificial, calculated to give an all-Israel, quote-unquote, dimension to the narrative.
Yeah, I could see that.
On verse 5, you are old. Several commentators note the irony here, given that the elders themselves are old. Bar-Efrat writes that this irony portrays the author's disapproval of their actions. Auld, however, writes that this may misunderstand their words. Their concern is not that he aged like them, but that he has appointed his sons and they were misbehaving in their judging. If the elders are inconsistent, it is more in showing no awareness that kings tend to be succeeded by their sons, even when that is not constitutionally required.
The part of Samuel for today's broadcast will be played by Joe Biden.
Oh, God, no.
And the even older elders who are far more dementia-ridden will be played by Trump.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
He doesn't stay on topic for more than half a sentence anyway. He can just play all of them, and we can pretend they're interrupting each other.
Yeah.
Bing, 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 bong.
Are you done with the political commentary? Good. On that same verse, such as all the other nations have. Klein writes that it is difficult to tell whether this phrase expresses a negative evaluation or it merely takes cognizance of the fact that kingship was a relatively late institution in Israel. The same phrase appears in Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 15. McCarter takes verse 5 here as a proto-Deuteronomic, quote unquote, and writes that the writer's quote was the writer was acquainted with the tradition of the inauguration of kingship, as it also appears in the Deuteronomic corpus, end quote. But Tsumura comments, quote, while the text in Deuteronomy is similar to our passage, and some claim that it was, quote, inspired by the tradition about Saul's coronation, end quote, according to Weinfeld, it should be noted that there are differences in the key statements. For example, Deuteronomy insists that the king be an Israelite, a non-issue in the Samuel account. In the Samuel passage, conscription of sons and daughters is forecast, while the Deuteronomy passage forbids multiplication of horses. But though the Samuel passage could be the realization of the situation envisioned in Deuteronomy, in 1020 only Israelites are involved in the lots, it is hard to think that the traditions recorded in Samuel were the source of the Deuteronomy passage. Kingship in Canaan was known to Israel from the beginning of the settlement. There were kings of city-states such as Adoni-Bezek of Jerusalem in Judges 1:5. There were also many examples outside of Israel, including the Egyptian kingship, as well as the nearby kingdoms of Aram, Moab, and Ammon. It was not surprising then that the writer of Deuteronomy would consider the possibility that someday a monarchy might be created in Israel. On verse 6, this displeased Samuel. Klein notes Arthur Weiser's opinion that Samuel was not opposed to kinship in general, but only to a king like those of the nations. But Bar-Efrat writes that by giving the ruling power to the king, there's an objection to the existing authority, a thing which displeases Samuel. McCarter writes that from a prophetic point of view, Samuel takes the request as a personal betrayal and also objects to its religious impropriety.
So maybe their view on kingship was how should I say this? Maybe it was like so tied to how like the other nations did it that that kings would be like in a sense sometimes would be representative of their nation's gods. So do you think that maybe if they did accept a king, they were just saying that we have a representation. It's just another representation of another god.
I don't know. I mean, kings have claimed to be divine or descended from divine or to have divine authority, like forever. And that may have been worse in this more primitive time when kings had more authority because everything was sort of more brutal and exaggerated. But they're still sort of very hand in fist with the power of the gods, and they have a specific job relationship to the gods with regard to ruling. I don't know. It's tough to say what they were thinking because the ideas and presentation were all so different. It's not
true.
It's not Queen Elizabeth with the the basically puppet to just state monarchy for show and the elected officials and this is so I don't know. I tend to think this is all later polemics written by people who, well, among other things, apparently need to blame the people for everything. Because remember, if the kings don't work out, it was the people's fault and God told you. And if the kings do work out, then God picked a good king. So heads I win, tails you lose, tennis without a net. And go. Another bingo square for God is a narcissist. So.
Yeah, I'm guessing the writers of the Deuteronomic history wouldn't have known much about like the this whole period.
Mm-hmm. There would have been
legends.
Aside from like the legends, like the thing is we don't exactly know what they would have had access to. We do know that they probably had some kind
of the wars of Yahweh.
Right. Yeah, they had like some kind of sources, right? But we don't have many of those. And we also sure. And we also don't really know not just what they had access to, but also in some cases what it's kind of those there's a phrase for it. It's like an unknown unknown, I think. Like
Mm.
it's stuff that's not even like referenced. So like they were working from some sources. Now they wrote it through their own lens at their time, but they had some kind of sources for some of it, right? So they would engage in a lot of rewriting, but it's for a chunk of it, I can't imagine it was all just made up whole cloth. They were working on stuff that they already had, and a lot of extrapolations from those things. Now, whether or not those things were accurate, I don't know. A lot of it probably wasn't. So yeah, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah. I'm guessing they
Got
had to
another comment
extract-
from, sorry, Isaac. Got a comment from Mr. Smith says, are there any extra biblical texts confirming any of the claims in Deuteronomy?
Well, in Deuteronomy specifically is a different question. But if we're talking about the Deuteronomistic history, which is the part that we're in, yeah, there are. We can verify not only the existence of some people, we can verify the existence of certain building projects. We can verify was it the vassalship? Is that the right word? Of certain kings.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are things that we can show extra biblically.
Even though those are not ever like, it's never exactly as it's represented in the scripture.
Oh,
Even
yeah,
the
totally
Seelu
not.
that mentioned David, it doesn't mention David. It mentions
The house of
a
David.
descendant of David. But then like Julius Caesar and the Caesars claim to be descended from, Romulus, I think, or whatever. So like,
Yeah, I'm guessing that they had, they've got this idea that, this is the first king that we know of, but he was a great king. He was a king of the whole country. So like, how do they explain this, going from like a backwater with no kings that we know
Mhm.
of to a super great king? Oh, God didn't want it. There was a period of judges ruling, and, the kingship was bad. And then suddenly and then the first king and second king, and it's suddenly they're all
And
these
Judges
powerful
is a
kings
great way
rather
to
than
work in all the
yeah,
local
rather
legends.
than like a more
So-
naturalistic explanation of like chieftains of cities and towns and stuff becoming gradually more powerful over time.
So yeah, having said that, like I do think there is an interesting sort of social correspondence between like the picture portrayed in the Book of Judges and the early parts of the Book of Samuel, and like the picture of early Iron Age Israel, of the Levant, where you see this explosion, right, of these highland settlements, these small villages that start dotting the countryside away from these Canaanite, Phoenician city states, and this is like so I think some of this does echo sort of a semblance of this historical reality of a time when these highland tribes, whoever they were, didn't have a more centralized authority. And no, and this is kind of reflected too in David Carr talks about this, and Ronald Handel also talks about this. I quite like this idea about in the book of Genesis, in the first part, what most scholars would call like the non-P primeval history, certainly from like Genesis 2 up through Genesis 11-12. There does seem to be this ongoing, recurring polemic against urbanization and a lionization of nomadism and getting out into the countryside. Cities are bad, the country is good.
Yeah.
It's yeah. So I
There's a
think
lot of
there's
that,
like
yeah.
there's something there, but frustratingly we have no access to it,
I-
right?
when
Beyond
I
just
think-
these.
Yeah, when I think about that period in the rise of civilizations all over the world, like not just in the Middle East, in like the Nordic lands, in Japan, you have people just starting to do agriculture. Maybe some people come together and they start to form the beginnings of a village, and eventually some strong guys figure, hey, we can just go take their shit because we have bigger sticks. And that, you know, this happened, there's raiding, and then at some point the village is going to either develop their own raiders, or they're going to take the pack of the raiders that's least offensive to them and be like, hey, we'll feed you if you keep the other raiders away. And this sort of, you know, builds up, and, you know, and then after the fact, you're building this up into great histories and great tales of daring do, you know, and big fish story it. And it really, you know, some of the acts that inspired these things might have been very petty, and, you know, but you turn them into, oh, this great noble battle for the blah 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 blah. And, you know, because David was like that. You know, when we get into the stories of David, I have so much to say about how much he's just like a petty, like he's a petty bandit leader at some points, you know. Your flocks were there, and I didn't touch them all the time. We didn't give them any trouble. Maybe you want to, you know, like that kind of stuff. It's incredibly petty and not at all admirable by today's standards, but at the same time, at the very beginnings of civilization, when there wasn't really much control going on, he may have been regarded as a lesser evil or a comparatively benevolent bandit chieftain, but like he's still the guy you're gonna kill in Skyrim for like first level loot. I'm sorry.
I'm gonna have to check out, guys. It's been fun. So
Thank you
I
for
will
coming.
Yeah.
see you around. Yeah, for sure.
Always glad to have you, sir.
Awesome.
Great to see you.
Later.
Right now,
Okay.
Tomer will stop holding up the show.
Yeah. Always blame the Jew. So on verse 7, they have rejected me as their king. Tsumura comments, rejecting the Lord meant to reject him as king. Thus, the people who demanded a human king to judge, quote unquote, them, like all the other nations had, were in the eyes of the Lord rejecting him who has been king forever. For Yahweh has been the sovereign king of the universe, the Lord of hosts who sits on the cherubim, according to 4:4. Note that Yahweh is ruling as a sovereign king not only over Israel, but also over the Philistines, 7:13. He has been king even from before the flood forever, Psalms 29:10. Therefore, the people's demand for a human king was the rejection of this eternal king. See also 10:19 and 12:12. On verse 9, the manner of the king. I'm reading the KJV. In Hebrew, Mishpat HaMelech. The phrase has been understood either as the law of the king, according to Targum and Kimchi, the manner of the king, according to Bar-Efrat, the justice of the king, according to McCarter and Klein, the right of the king, according to Tsumura, etc. Klein writes that this was, quote, an old document which the historian incorporated at this place, end quote, explaining either the conduct of the king, according to Hertzberg, or the constitutional rights of the king, according to Kayard. He also notes the wordplay between the word mishpat and the root shin pei tet, to judge, which occurs 6 more times in this chapter. He writes, quote, this wordplay adds a special, almost bitter nuance. While the people had protested about the behavior of Samuel's sons as judges and their perversion of justice, Samuel insisted that the justice, quote unquote, in Hebrew mishpat, the people would actually receive through the new king would be a gross miscarriage of all that was considered right in Israel, end quote. On verse 13, perfumers, in Hebrew rakachot. Although this reading is favored by Septuagint, Vulgate, and traditional commentators, Targum reads servants. Van Staldein Sulman notes that the craft of a perfumer was highly respected and desired, according to Talmud Kiddushin 82b, and perfumers could only be male Levites because of the sanctity of the temple, especially those producing incense for the temple service. Likewise, Peshitta reads weavers. Klein notes Peter Ackroyd's. Sorry?
Sorry.
Klein notes Peter Ackroyd's view that perfumers might be a euphemism for concubines, according to Nehemiah 3:8, a view which
I
Tsumura
suspected
rejects.
as much.
Yeah, but it's not universally accepted.
Could also
get
be like what's it called again? Medicine mixers and stuff.
Yeah, I guess. Okay. On verse 14, his attendants, in Hebrew, le'avadav. The word is usually understood to mean servants or slaves, and is rendered as such by the early translations. Modern commentators, however, take the term to refer to officials or courtiers. McCarter writes that the servant of the king refers, quote, not to a menial functionary, but to a ranking member of the court. This is clear not only from the biblical evidence, for example, 2 Kings 22:12, which is also 2 Chronicles 34:20 and 2 Kings 25:8, but also from surviving Israelite and other Northwest Semitic seals inscribed with this title after proper names, end quote. Thus, servants here refer to royal courtiers who quote, who quote, who is as feudatories of the king receive grants of land confiscated from the people, a practice known also at Ugarit, end quote. Klein renders royal servants and notes that the root Ein Bet Dalet can mean vassal, as we see in Joshua 9:8 and 11, 2 Samuel 10:19, 2 Kings 16:7, etc., and even notes relationship of a people to its own king. Thus, you will become his vassals in verse 17 would form a fitting last line in a royal treaty, end quote. On verse 16, your cattle. The Masoretic text reads, your young men, bachurechem. Septuagint has your cattle, reading bakarechem. Several commentators like McCarter and Klein follow the Septuagint, since young men seems out of place in this verse, which begins with servants and continues with donkeys. Tsumura renders calves and notes the Akkadian cognate buru, which means young calf. He writes that the Hebrew term could refer to any young being, either animal or man. Citing Weinfeld, who writes that in some ancient Near Eastern documents of release and exemption, the royal workforce is represented by the triad slave, oxen, and donkey. Thus fits the Masoretic text.
Oh, now you're sounding a bit underwater.
Am I?
Yeah, try again.
Yeah, sorry.
Go back a little bit.
Yeah, citing
That's better.
Weinfeld.
Yeah.
Citing Weinfeld, he writes that in some ancient Near Eastern documents of release and exemption, the royal workforce is represented by the triad slave, oxen, and donkeys, and thus fits the Masoretic text.
Makes sense.
Okay. Verses 19 through 21. Klein comments, despite Samuel's awful warning, the people refused to listen and repeated the demand for a king. Refusal to listen is part of the repeated Deuteronomistic indictment of Israel, as in 2 Kings 17:14, and compare Jeremiah 11:10 and 13:10. In verse 20, the people's desire to be like the nations is given a more prominent position than in verse 5, and it is presumably to be interpreted here quite negatively. While some passages in DH indicate that all the nations were destroyed at the conquest, as we see in Joshua 21, verses 43 to 45, other passages indicate that the nations were left as a test and temptation, according to Joshua 13, 1 through 6, 23, 12 to 13, Judges 1 through 2, 5, and 2, 20 to 23. In 1 Samuel 8, the people failed the test and succumbed to a desire to be like the nations. And finally, on verse 22, Auld comments, the sharpest interpretive puzzle comes in this brief culmination of 1 Samuel 5 through 8. The terms of Yahweh's response leave open both possibilities envisaged in the previous paragraph. Yahweh charges Samuel with taking appropriate action, but notes significantly, if quietly, that this will be done for them, quote unquote. Samuel's response is somewhat opaque. Sending each to his city, quote unquote, is unusual. The more normal idiom uses his tent or his house or his place. The more important observation is that we would expect this formula to mark the successful end of a story. Here, however, we have to ask, Is Samuel playing for time, or is he even refusing to take the divine instruction forward? That's it for my commentary.
Yeah,
It's looking to me like we may not finish 1 Samuel today.
Do we?
I think you're right. I think your instincts are on point here, Aaron.
Damn it, I was hoping to finish the whole Bible today. All right, so I guess we will be moving to 1 Samuel 9 next week.
Sure.
Ooh,
That's
so.
yeah.
Getting
That's
in with the things.
yeah. This chapter introduces Saul. Finally.
Okay. All right,
That's gonna be
outstanding. Thank you,
I
everyone.
see-
Anybody got
I
any
see what-
closing
wait.
comments?
I see one
Some-
comment.
Yeah, one question,
Yes.
Arn.
So Kyler Ashby says, "Is Aaron doing another debate soon?" Also, I love his political videos lately. I'm sure there's going to be another political video. I've been trying to compose that one. Don't have any debates coming up for whatever reason. Fucking cowards is what I attribute that to.
They do run
I
away.
keep inviting them,
Yeah.
and they keep running away, making a squealing noise.
Maybe they know they're wrong.
Ah,
I think they
Like-
know they're wrong.
like-
Yeah.
They don't
Well-
know that that's what they think.
Aaron,
Yeah.
you remember, Aaron plays dirty. He does these horribly manipulative things like defining his terms and speaking clearly and not letting you wiggle out of what you just fucking said 2 seconds ago. So really,
Yeah.
I mean, what else?
That's the script I'm writing today, as a matter of fact. Conversation I've been in for the last week, where I'm just fed up with the fucking cowardice.
In all fairness, Arn,
But anyway.
you did get slaughtered last week because you can't make a man with a sperm and an egg. I was there for that.
Oh,
Sorry.
Yeah.
For people who haven't seen
The
it,
chicken
go
and the
watch.
egg. That
Watch.
that was honestly his
Yeah.
whole go-to.
yeah, Aaron, you can't even do that. He could do that.
Yeah.
If
Well,
you gave him a sperm, he would make something out of it.
Someone who hates education doesn't understand anything, so magic is
Somebody
real.
who came on to say, who openly admit that he's never studied biology or theology or nothing. I don't know nothing about nothing. But you're wrong. That was honestly his position.
I commend you for not having broken your own nose flat with face palming at this point.
I've heard Dr. Dunning
Yeah.
is talking to Dr. Kruger to find the next level for this one.
All right. Well,
Remember
thanks
when
for
we
that.
thought-
I'm very much looking forward to the next week.
I should finish with two comments by Christians. First, yeah, I think it's interesting. So first, the apostolic constitutions write that bishops who bear greater responsibilities than kings should receive greater benefits from their charges.
Also,
Oh,
the apostolic
boy.
constitutions later forgery.
Yeah, it doesn't
And-
matter. They were still using it at this point.
And
Jesus.
and now I should quote from Clement of Alexandria from Christ the Educator 3:4-26-27, quote, "I must now express my disapproval of the possession of too many slaves. People resort to servants to escape work and waiting on themselves. The word has given a complete description of these offenders when he promised through the prophet Samuel that the people who were demanding a king would have not a kind master, but one who would be an unfeeling tyrant, given over to immorality, who will take, he said, your daughters to make him ointments and to be his cooks and bakers, who will rule by law of war and not be zealous for the administration of peace." Good night, everybody.
Tomer, we're on God's Not Dead 5 and Christ the Educator 3. I got a lot of movies to catch up on.
Yeah, Cliff did that. You
I
unliterate
cannot.
bastard.
It is not
Thomas-
even noon here. I can't drink yet.
we give you permission. Thomas, someone in the comments said, "What book are you reading from?"
Yes.
Well,
I mean, I have
since-
my
Since
bibliography. is in-
Lilith brought it up, I should mention that what I'm drinking today is the Reverend.
Look at
Oh,
you, pious
Yeah.
guy Arn over here.
Yeah.
Tomer,
If you're interested, I
Tomer,
have the bibliography.
you'll be
Yeah.
happy to know that I have your back because I pointed out that all of your links are in the description of this video. And there was another comment
Yeah, thank
that you should need to show a little bit more respect. And I pointed out that after all, this is your show, so you can do whatever you want.
Oh,
So,
oh.
I mean, we all know this, right?
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's really, this whole show has always been the love triangle. It was the bromance between Lawrence and Aaron, and then Tomer came in and inserted himself, and now we have a love triangle. And I'm just here for the tea.
Oh,
Okay. Until
on that note,
You can speak with me on Discord if you want to complain about stuff. I guess about me. You can do that.
they can try.
We love you, Tomer.
Yeah, I welcome it.
Yeah,
Yeah, we haven't had a good debate on the Discord in a while.
yeah. I guess.
Gonna be another long, awkward
waiting for
silence if
Harrington.
no one
So
says
that's-
goodbye.
Yeah, so that's the show for today. And make sure to join the Discord, just like Tomer said.
Yeah.
Make sure to subscribe to Milwaukee Atheists. We're covering the Apocalypse of Paul. A lot of interesting stuff
Woo!
happening in that text. So
fun.
yeah, make sure to do that. Big video coming out soon on biblical cosmology.
if you watch enough of Lawrence's content, you'll be a Bible scholar too.
You won't be. I don't talk about it enough.
Hey, no, that's absolutely where I got, my information was the degree of Lawrence. I have a degree in Lawrence.
Lawrence is gonna get. If you watch all his videos, Lawrence will give you his diploma, which is called the Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, I mean, it's still better than the whatever the fuck Oved came up with from the desert.
Ah, perfect.
Yes,
Such
and
a
if
low
you
bar
write
has
in-
been set.
If you write into Milwaukee Atheists and include your checker money order for $100, Lawrence will send you a doctorate of truthology.
Yeah, that sounds
And
fair.
Arn will donate another snake to have Hovind bit again.
That poor snake. They did not deserve that.
Okay, now someone say
Poison
goodbye
bladder.
so I can hit the outro.
Goodbye.
Wow.
Raiders.